Well, good afternoon. I'm Brian Ferguson. For those I haven't met, founder of Arena Labs. Our focus at Arena is in what we call high performance medicine. We spent the last 3 years working with frontline medical teams and surgical cultures all over the US. And our focus in that work is on bringing the science of performance and the tools and frameworks used in other high pressure disciplines, be it the military, elite athletes, or the creative arts, into modern healthcare. And going back several years, some of the early collaborations we did at the Cleveland Clinic brought to light the fact that the modern surgeon, nurse, or medical team is really learned in the space of technical skill, but doesn't focus in all of the other non-technical skills that make a team successful in a high stress, high pressure environment. Obviously, the current world circumstances around COVID-19 are bringing this to light in a very acute way. And so we continue to hear from our partners a number of challenges and questions. And so what we thought we'd do is bring some of our partners from outside medicine into the forefront to highlight some of the lessons they've learned in terms of leadership and in particular leading in crisis operations. So today, really grateful to have a good friend, partner, and someone who is a thought leader in this space, Coleman Ruiz, joining us. Coleman's coming from Annapolis, Maryland. He's a graduate of the Naval Academy where he was a Division I athlete. He wrestled there. But then he went on to have a 13-year career in special operations where he served as the Navy SEAL officer. And I think of all the folks I know in this space, one of the reasons that Coleman is such a unique resource, number one, he's a very deep thinker, both in terms of his own life experiences, but synthesizing that into a broader ecosystem of places like medicine. He's the founder of Mission Critical Teams Institute with Dr. Preston Klein, their co-founders. We'll talk a little bit more about their work in a minute. But back to his service, one of the things about Coleman's time is that his sort of coming of age in the military directly paralleled the increase in combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He did 6 combat deployments. And while there are a lot of people who have similar stories, Coleman's time was in particular in a very dynamic, fluid environment, thinking about building teams in that structure. And a lot of what he learned has been published and brought to light in articles, but Coleman's written about it extensively, and I think it's very apropos to medicine. So for today, we're going to dive into that. And there's 2 buckets that we're going to think about. One is what Coleman calls the esoteric, and this is the stuff around mindset that I've heard a lot of physicians and nurses talk about. Even though they're used to being in an acute environment or stressful environment, what we're experiencing right now is on a level that's been unimaginable. So how do we think about mindset going into our hospital every day? And the second then is going to be what in the military is known as commander's guidance or leadership intent, and then the process that accompanies giving a team guidance and then putting in place a framework. So let's dive in with Coleman. Coleman, good to see you, my friend.
Hey, man. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate the intro and the background for everybody. And for everybody on the other end of the line, appreciate you guys bearing with us. Hopefully this is helpful.
Yeah, so I want to start, I think, you're a senior fellow at the Vice Admiral James B. Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership. So Admiral Stockdale, obviously a legendary leader in the military, was at the infamous Hanoi Hilton, but maybe talk a little bit about your time there, and we can start around the what's known as the Stockdale Paradox, because I think, again, that's very apropos to this conversation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, the Stockdale Center, which lives inside of Luce Hall, which is on the grounds of the U.S. Naval Academy. The Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership is an independent research and collaboration institute that informs the curriculum at the Naval Academy, but doesn't, teach a class every week, say. That's not their job. It used to be run by retired Colonel Art Athens, now run by retired U.S. Marine Corps Colonel Joe Thomas. And, won't go into everything the Stockdale Center does, but for a little frame of reference here for the people who aren't really familiar with Admiral Stockdale's military career, I'm certainly not going to detail his career. Lots of people didn't ever really know who he was until, he was running as vice president with Ross Perot, and he was the dean of Citadel at one point. But be that as it may, Admiral Stockdale spent 8 years in the Hanoi Hilton, roughly 4 in solitary confinement, and 2 of those 4 in leg irons. And so the obviously conditions that Senator McCain, who's buried here at the Naval Academy, and Admiral Stockdale and other POWs endured is nothing like today. It was nothing like my combat deployments, and it's nothing like the situation we're going through now. But this topic that we talk about in terms, that people use the word mental toughness almost ad nauseum in environments where we're just generally uncomfortable. If you really want to read a intellectual's and a practitioner's, a survivor's and a warrior's reflection on the details, I think, and the emotions of mental toughness, one should read Admiral Stockdale's Thoughts of a Philosophical Fighter Pilot. It's essentially a collection of speeches that he gave roughly from 1986 to 1991 at different universities and things like this. And he references all sorts of topics. I have it on my bookshelf here, and I have sticky notes and underlinings and highlights all over it. But what Brian's talking about is this interview that Jim Collins, who was a professor at Stanford, I think, while he was writing Good to Great, and he had done an interview with Admiral Stockdale, and I'll read sort of how the interview went. It's pretty short. He asked Admiral Stockdale how he found the courage to survive his situation in the Hanoi Hilton. And Stockdale said, "I never lost faith in the end of the story." He said, "I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life." And Collins said, "I didn't say anything for a few minutes. And then I asked him, well, who didn't make it out?" And Admiral Stockdale said, "Oh, that's easy. The optimists." The optimists? Jim Collins asked him, like, that just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. Collins said he was completely confused. And Admiral Stockdale said, the optimists, oh, they were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas, and Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they'd say, we're going to be out by Easter, and Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. And after another long pause and a little bit more walking, Admiral Stockdale turned and said, this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. And of course, the meaning, Brian, to us, to people, particularly frontline medical staff and first responders and tactical law enforcement, and the mix of everyone who's on the front lines of any frontline situation, whether it's combat overseas or it's dealing with the situation we have in the U.S. now, is the same concept that Lawrence Gonzalez writes about in a fantastic book called Deep Survival, subtitle, Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. And one of the first rules, you know, in general survival, if you talk to a mountaineer, if you talk to Admiral Stockdale, if you talk to someone who's been in combat, you talk to a doctor or a nurse on the front lines today, is you have to make this intangible, weirdly ill-defined shift that almost what Coach Pete Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks says is be where your feet are. Like the situation you are in, as radically bizarre and as abruptly things have changed, the situation we're in is actually the situation we're in. And that's not an intuitive feeling for, I would say, most people who are in it for the first time. And I can only speak, you know, for the training that we went through out in Coronado. You know, I went through our basic training for the SEAL teams in 1998. And I have this recollection of the most miserable thing you do in our training, at least as far as I'm concerned, is sitting in the surf zone with all your teammates in the freezing cold Pacific Ocean water, and you can't move and you can't warm up, and you just sit there and freeze. And you have to start to accept this idea of there's no good and bad weather. There's just weather. There's no warm and cold water. There's just water. And it's the same idea of when you finally in your own mind, it doesn't make it any easier. I know we're going to talk about the human factor. It doesn't make the stress any lower. Maybe it does make it a little lower. It doesn't make the impact on your system and the exhaustion. It doesn't make any of that any better. But when you cross the Rubicon to accepting that how it used to be, how I want it to be, how I wish it would be, when that's all gone, when you've essentially released that, you know, way of thinking from your system, I think you can't do anything else in a challenging environment. Your team can't do it. You can't take on any other mental toughness skills, so to speak, until you address very first that the situation I'm in is just the situation I'm in.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I know you're a deep student of the Stoicism, but this has been brought to light a lot, and it's obviously one of the things Stockdale was deep in himself, was the Stoic mindset. And I think what you just brought up, that paradox of being hopeful and at the same time understanding the sort of radically accepting the current scenario you're in or being honest about it, is one of the things that I know teams are grappling with.